Hello friends, my name is Marines, and today I'll be wrapping up the next batch of books that I read. Book number 30 was Persuasion by Jane Austen, which I own a physical copy of, but I usually read on the free version that I got from my Kindle. Persuasion is one of the three classics that I try to reread yearly, the other two being Pride and Prejudice and Jane Eyre. This year in 2017, I didn't do as much reading as I would have liked to, but I did a butt ton of rereading and I did get to all three classics. I came to Persuasion in my later 20s, so while there isn't a lot of nostalgia here in terms of, having read this half my life like I have done with Jane Eyre and Pride and Prejudice, I really think that this is a book for your adult years, and Anne Elliot is definitely a protagonist for your adult years. I feel like I really relate to Anne, especially her desire to be useful and her desire to always be within the best company. I think this story is different also because whereas Pride and Prejudice is a lot about Lizzie and Darcy falling in love and finding out about each other, in this book that has already happened between Anne and Captain Wentworth. I love noticing in the details as I reread all of the ways that it is very apparent that these two people know each other very well, and it becomes clear that they still care about each other a lot as well. I love this story, obviously. I read it a lot and it is always a 5 out of 5 star read for me. Book number 31 was The Refrigerator Monologues by Catherynne and Valente. Hey, I don't know if I've ever mentioned it, but I really love the Fairyland series by Catherynne and Valente. Prior to this point, I had not read anything else by her. I did try Deathless at one point earlier a few months ago and I couldn't quite get into it, but then this collection of short stories was released and I decided to give it a go. I ended up purchasing it for my Kindle. This is a group of interconnected short stories that follows female superheroes or girlfriends of superheroes who are refrigerated. The women in refrigerators trope can refer to this idea of disposable women, or women who are killed in very gruesome ways in order to provide this moment of grief and or later motivation for a male hero. Gail Simone originally compiled a list that really highlighted the way that women can be brutalized in this manner in comic books. This collection really snarks the shit out of that trope, and it gives a voice to these women who are previously used as just cannon fodder. She gives them a story, and ones that are often hilarious in their tongue-in-cheek commentary, but are also very heartbreaking because all of the women still face the same fate in the end. If you come to this collection expecting some kind of subversion, I think you might be disappointed because it really takes the story and the outcome at face value, and what it gives it is that ability to tell the story from the women's point of view. I really love the structures of the stories. It's this group of women in some kind of afterlife and they call themselves the Hell Hath Club, and they're telling their stories to each other, being able to finally voice them. There were a couple of the stories that I thought got a little bit too convoluted and too heavy, which is funny because I really love her writing style and it is very description heavy, where in something like Fairyland it really adds to the magic, but something here that is almost has some action to it, it can weigh down the action, and I kind of lost my place and had to reread a few things to really figure out what was going on. I ended up giving this collection 4.5 out of 5 stars. Book number 32 is The Many by Wyl Menmuir. In my last wrap-up video I talked about how in 2016 I bought a lot, if not all, of the books that were long listed for the Man Booker Prize, and I read 4 or 5 of them and I didn't really enjoy any of them, so I stopped reading and making my way through the list. This was one of the long listed books in 2016 and I finally made my way to it. This is an almost spooky story of a man who comes to a small fishing village to start over and is fixing up a house for his wife who is perpetually about to join him throughout the story. While he's there, he really starts to try to make sense of the village and of its inhabitants and of the memory of the man who used to own the house he now owns. This book is incredibly atmospheric and it is very heavy with grief. It feels very lazy and very hazy and very dreamlike, and it surrounds this small town and the sea, so it very much sounds like a book that I should have enjoyed. Unfortunately, I found that it was almost too atmosphere heavy for such a simple plot. Until the twist at the end of the story, the entire plot really just boiled down to, wow, these village folk are weird. I really didn't care for a majority of it, even as it was super easy to sink into that atmosphere, if that makes sense. Then we get to the end and there's a slight reveal about what's going on in the town. I say slight because you have an idea as to what's happening, and it is left very open to interpretation and very hazy even at the end. It did leave me thinking though, and re-examining everything that I thought was a little pointless before, like the strangeness of the village, or the pointlessness of Timothy's repeated fishing trips, or his trying to repair this home ultimately, I think those things were all explorations of his grief. It suddenly pulls into focus this idea of the ocean as a stand-in for grief, and how oily and murky it is, and how all it produces are these half-formed creatures. And there's Timothy riding along in it in a boat literally called the Great Hope. And so I didn't enjoy a lot of this until the very end, and then at that point I wanted to really think about it and talk about it with other people. So that balanced out to me, and I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. Book number 33 was City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. I have just recently done a full review on this book, and I also live tweeted it with the hashtag City of Snark. I originally read this a handful of years ago, and I went into it knowing that I wouldn't necessarily like it, but also knowing that it would be good material to pick apart and snark. I think it's hard to say what my main issue with the story was, but I think it was that it was poorly written, and I guess that's like the underlying thing of everything else that I could say about it, about the plot and about the intolerable characters. Like, that all goes back, I think, to some empty writing, some low quality writing. I just didn't find a lot to enjoy there. I didn't like the plot. I didn't think the world was very well developed, or what was developed was fed to us in a very ham-fisted way. I didn't like Clary. I didn't like Jace. I think this was a product of a lot of the popular YA of the time, and it has a lot of the same tropes. So it's not something that I enjoy. Those are tropes that not only do I think that they're overdone, but they were just never tropes that I was really into. I don't understand the women hating women trope. I don't understand the douchiness and rudeness is sexy in a man trope. So they're just not things that I enjoy, and they weren't done particularly well in this book either. I ended up giving this 1 out of 5 stars. Book number 34 was Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I'm not entirely sure when I picked this up, but it did spend some time on my bookshelf, and then this past Hispanic Heritage Month, I decided to pick this one up. Certain Dark Things is a paranormal story in an alternate present in which during the 1970s there was a discovery of vampires. Mexico is one of the countries that has the most lax rules and laws pertaining to vampires, so they've kind of all flooded there, and you have all these species of vampires coming to Mexico, and in the wake of that, Mexico City has walled itself off to kind of keep the peace and the law and the order. The invasion of all of these species of vampires is also kind of bad news for the native species, which our main character, Atal, is one of those vampires. Her family is murdered at the beginning of this story by a rival vampire species, and she flees to Mexico City with her companion dog, Wally, and there she meets a street boy named Domingo, and they're all trying to get out of the country. This is just a beautifully done, culture-rich vampire story. It absolutely reads like folklore, and the world and the premise read so fresh in a space that has the reputation for being kind of, pardon the pun, bled dry. On top of that, the characters are amazing, and I fell in love with them and was totally invested in them very quickly. Moreno-Garcia balances the action of Atal's flee from Mexico City with these more tender character moments, which I really appreciated. All of her characters are complicated. They're tough and they're morally gray, but they're just trying to survive, and they're also dealing with all of these feelings. I finished the story with my heart in my throat, and it's one of those books that you end with a certain kind of sadness for leaving this world and these characters because you've invested so much in them. My one and only complaint is that I found that the beginning was a little bit awkward in its establishing of the folklore and of the characters. I thought it was a little bit too on the nose and a little bit too exposition heavy and a little graceless, but once the story finds its footing, and it does find its footing, and rather quickly, I think it really excels from there. I really appreciated this rich cultural take on vampire lore, and I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. That's it for me today. As always, I'd love to chat with you guys about any of the books that I've mentioned down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. It absolutely reads like folklore, and the world and the details and the characters read so fresh in a